Now I'm going to try and make this hinge installation as easy as it can possibly be. That means no tape measure, no rulers, no nothing. All we're going to do is transfer marks. That's exactly why we did it this way. If you remember, the jig that we used on the legs before is based on a center mark. And we can transfer the center mark from the existing mortise holes that are already here. We could transfer those directly to the door. So instead of measuring from the top down and the bottom up and basically doing things that can multiply our error, taking the marks directly from the workpiece and transferring them to the next workpiece is really the most accurate way to do this. So let me show you the details. Now you can see I have my center lines marked for each one of the mortises here. And the idea is really fairly simple. I want to place the door in its location and transfer those marks directly to the door. Now of course I can't transfer them the way they are right now because the door is sitting on the bottom, giving us the extra wide gap at the top. So what I like to do is either use scrap wood, very thin strips of scrap wood, or in this case I had an old feeler gauge set that I just took apart and grabbed the right feeler gauges so that I have the same distance at the top and the bottom. So it doesn't matter what the number is, I just want them to be the same, and I want them to essentially immobilize the door while it's in position. So I lay one stack at the bottom, put the door in place, and then wedge the other stack in the top. And now it's as easy as marking the pencil line and transferring it to the door. Now I'm just going to transfer those marks from the front face to the side. Now if you remember, I told you that we should probably leave the router alone so that by the time we get to this point, the fence is already set and we don't need to change anything, and that's exactly what we did. So it's ready to go. All I need to do is clamp the jig on and start routing.
Now it's time to peg the tenons in a door. I pre-drill for the dowels and then tap them into place with a little bit of glue. After a quick trim, I use the hollow chisel mortiser just like before to make the holes for the ebony plugs.
Just like before, I can insert the ebony plug, put a little glue in first.
The hinges are very easy to install. I just pre-drill with a self-centering bit and drive the screw with the help of a little wax.
Well, let's just see how it goes. The fit looks pretty good. If those are even slightly off, I'm not going to be able to get them in. Fortunately, they're going in. Okay, one down, one to go. All right, we are cruising for the finish line. Now, one of the final things that I need to focus on is the handles for the unit, and there are hundreds of things that we could potentially do. Anything from making your own to buying, and if you're making your own, there's just so many options. So nailing down one that looks good and represents the piece the way you want it to is really the trick. So I've come up with this little stacked handle here. It basically consists of 3 pieces. Now this is just a mock-up I made out of Babinga. Consists of 3 different pieces. The bottom one is the thickest one and has a nice little cove cut out in it, and that's for the fingers. And the idea is that one will go on the right side, one will go on the left side, and will sort of make a nice image when the doors are closed, but when you pull the doors apart, you see that it's 2 separate handles. So it's going to take a lot of fine finesse work, but it'll be worth it in the end. So I'm going to make these out of ebony.
Each handle is glued up from 3 pieces of ebony, a thick piece on the bottom and 2 thin pieces on top. The drum sander is great for creating thin strips. Now the bottom piece receives a nice cove at the router table. Each strip is trimmed to the appropriate width at the table saw using the gripper push pad. It's really the only thing that makes this a safe cut. Then each piece is cut to length at the miter saw.
Okay, so with a little bit of sanding on the edges, I basically have my 3-ply sandwich here of ebony. And all I need to do is glue these three together, just keeping the back nice and flush. So I'm going to use a couple scrap pieces of MDF here to do that. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is use a combination of wood glue and a fast drying CA glue, and that way I get the best of both worlds. I get a hold quickly, but then I also have the wood glue that's going to dry over the course of a few minutes. And I actually do this by eye. It's pretty easy to tell when it's off and when everything's centered. A little bit of quick activator should help close that joint up. And a couple of spring clamps should do the rest.
Using the same CA glue trick as before, I attach the handles to the doors. A good square helps to make sure that the handles are even with each other. And a clamp on each handle gives the pressure we need for the yellow glue to do its job.
All right, folks, here it is. This is the big moment. The cabinet is pretty much done. The only thing I have left to do is the little back panel magnetic strips. Those still need a little bit of sanding, and I'm going to finish them separately, but the cabinet itself is done. Now, in about a week, I have to deliver this piece, and that means about a 13-hour drive all the way up to Northern California. With this in the back of the car, that's a whole lot of fumes for me to be breathing in, so I want to get it finished as soon as possible, let it off gas, let it start curing, and then hopefully by the time we get it there, everything will be good to go. So the finish I'm going to use is Armor Seal, you know, the thing I sort of, my default finish, if anything. The reason I'm doing that, and this would have been a great project for me to experiment with the water-based finishes, but I have a little trouble sometimes ordering the things, the order of events in the video, and how I actually would do them in real time in my shop. They don't necessarily make sense in the video, so I didn't want to pre-finish all of the parts and then have to deal with that during the assembly. So for the sake of continuity in the video, I just basically put the piece together and then separated the finishing into a whole separate sequence. So the finishing itself is something that we've done many times before on the show. I even have it on my DVD, a simple varnish finish. I'm going to follow that exact process to finish the entire thing. But this is really a special moment in your the life cycle of your project, is when you apply the finish to it and you see everything come to life. So I can't wait to get started, so we're going to jump right in.
I apply a liberal coat of varnish to the surface and let it soak in, and then I wipe off the excess with a cloth rag. Even the back receives the care and attention it deserves. And for a detailed review of this wiping varnish finishing method, check out my DVD, A Simple Varnish Finish, available at Rockler stores and thewoodwhisperer.com.
Well, if you can believe it, the gadget station is finally done. And in fact, we leave for our road trip tomorrow to deliver it, so I couldn't have cut it any closer. I'd like to show you some of the details. We've talked about these things along the way, but it's kind of nice to see it in the final product and how it affects the look of the piece. We'll start with the outside and then we'll move on to the inside. So the first thing that I'd like to point out is the grain flow. Now in this piece, that was a major consideration from day one. I wanted to make sure that I use similar looking boards or cut my pieces all from the same board so that the grain would flow continuously throughout the piece, and that's sort of a repeated theme inside and out. Now the most noticeable, at least for me, is this top rail. In fact, I even modified and veered off from the traditional structure of a door, which normally has your stiles, like this one, where the stile goes all the way up and the rails rest between the stiles. Well, I abandoned that here in the center for the sake of grain continuity, because I thought it would look cool. So the top rail, you see, goes all the way across, and the grain just continues right across there. Same thing with the bottom rail. And in order to do that, I needed to bring my stiles up in between the rails. So that's the justification for doing that. There are structural reasons, why that's the tradition, but in a small cabinet like this, I don't think it's really going to be much of an issue, and I think this was a good choice for the sake of the look. Now the other thing to look at is how the sides and the top have a grain continuity. If you remember when we cut those boards out initially, if they weren't cut from the same board, they were cut from very similar looking boards so that it would flow all the way throughout the piece. And I think it really does add to the final look. Now, the other thing you may notice here is that the sides, the legs, the top, the bottom, those actually look significantly different from the wood that was used for everything else. And we didn't really talk about this before, but I could point it out now. You notice how on the end grain, it's kind of at a 45-degree angle, okay? That's a rift sawn board, and that's what gives us this sort of very straight line look that we get on the legs, top, and bottom. But on the front, this was an entirely different board. This is actually flat sawn Babinga, and you can see that the grain lines are horizontal to the face of the board. So what you wind up with is a little bit more of a wavy look, and the doors themselves, the door frames, do differ in that way from the rest of the case. Someone may not like that, but I thought it looked really cool, so I went with it. Now looking at the front again, you could see the spalted maple panels are book matched, and you'll notice there is a little bit of a difference here, just in the amount of material that I removed between those panels, and then I did a little bit of sanding. The thickness of the material and the way that the spalting takes place, it doesn't just all go straight down, and this image is not sort of continuous all the way through. It changes as you go through the thickness of a board. So the further those two slices get from each other, the more likelihood there is that they will look a little bit different. So just in the little bit of space that must have been between these two slices of that board, there's a pretty decent difference between them in terms of the amount of spalting. But for the most part, you can still tell that it is a book match set. Overall, I think looks pretty cool. The other thing to notice at the front here are the ebony handles and how those came out. I don't know, I just thought it was a cool idea. I'm not really even sure I can give you a whole lot of justification for what I did and why it looks the way it does, but I thought it fit well with the piece. They're very functional because you can get your fingers right behind them and open the door. I like those a lot. So let's take a look at the inside. Now the inside of the cabinet is pretty straightforward. We've just got 3 shelves for the electronics, bottom shelf for the surge protector, and the way you run the cords through the back and down to the bottom is probably the most interesting part here. Those little strips that we made are held in with the rare earth magnets. And the idea is you take a strip off, you run your cords through, it gives you plenty of room to work, you set your piece of electronics down, and now all we're really going to have is a single wire that's going through the back and down to the bottom. So I don't want to have to see this hole the whole time. I want to be able to put this back in place. So the little strip goes back into the dado on the side, and the magnet holds it in place. And there's just enough room for a cord to sneak out behind there. And in some cases, you may just be able to put the cord through this middle section and then pull it over to the side. And now that piece of electronics is not only connected, but it can't be pulled back and out through the back of the unit, so it holds it in place. Now each one of those back panels, there's 6 of them, each one of them is removable, and they are all grain matched. If you look very closely, you'll notice that they were cut from the same board. So when you step back and look from a distance, it's actually kind of hard to notice that those back panel pieces will come out if you pull them. So kind of a neat little hidden trick there. Now in the back, there's not really a whole lot to show you. It's just the back of the system. You can see how this is wide open. Plenty of circulation room for heat and things to escape up and out the back of the cabinet. So that, my friends, is the gadget station. And the only thing left to do is take the long road trip up to Northern California and deliver it.